what was the Tuffour versus Attorney General? This was a very controversial matter in which the Supreme Court was invited to have a conversation about something Parliament has done. I'll say it in just one line in a minute. A nomination had been made by the President for the position of Chief Justice in the person of Chief Justice Akpaloo. Chief Justice Akpaloo had appeared before the Appointments Committee of Parliament. He had indicated to the Appointments Committee of Parliament that he needn't be there because he was already Chief Justice. You see, it's a bit technical, but we can understand it. The 1979 Constitution came in to replace the military regime of SMCD 2, SMC 1, and all of that. During the military regimes, Parliament was closed down. The military became the executive, but the judiciary was maintained. However, the soldiers never maintained the Supreme Court. So the court structure ends at the Court of Appeal because the responsibility of the Supreme Court is constitutional interpretation. Soldiers didn't want their decrees to be subject to interpretation by the Supreme Court. So when the soldiers come, they close down the Supreme Court. Those people were talking about coup. I don't know whether they've forgotten. Anytime the soldiers come, they close down the Supreme Court. So the highest court is the Court of Appeal. So, the Chief Justice is a member of the Court of Appeal. Now, the transitional provisions of the 1979 Constitution said that any judge who was with the Superior Court of Judicature, that means the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court, we call it the Superior Court of Judicature. Any judge who was a judge of the Superior Court of Judicature will continue under the Constitution as a judge as if he was appointed under the Constitution. I'm sure you get that. So, if you were a High Court judge, during the coup time, you're a High Court judge. The Constitution comes, you remain a High Court judge as if you were appointed under the Constitution. Chief Justice Akpaloo was the Chief Justice. He was the Court of Appeal judge and the Chief Justice. And then the Constitution came. So his understanding of the matter was that he remains Chief Justice. He didn't have to be nominated by the President under the Constitution, but the President nominated him. He appeared before Parliament Appointments Committee. He indicated his resistance. The committee said he should be vetted. He was vetted and he failed the vetting. And so somebody took out a writ, Dr. Tuffour of blessed memory, took out a writ to the Supreme Court and said, Mr. Supreme Court, Parliament didn't have the power to vet Chief Justice Akpaloo because under the constitutional arrangement, he was already a Chief Justice, and therefore the vetting of Justice Akpaloo was unconstitutional. The point was raised by Joe Rinder of the Attorney General that, no, you can't say that Parliament's a master of his own procedure. Parliament has vetted him and determined that he's not fit to be Chief Justice. Even if he was Chief Justice already, Parliament has made the decision. Vetting, the Appointment Committee hearing, is a matter for Parliament. The court cannot come in. The Supreme Court said, no, we can come in. If Parliament has been determined to do something that is unconstitutional, then the Supreme Court will come in. So the Supreme Court came in, made a determination that the vetting of Justice Akpaloo was unconstitutional, that Justice Akpaloo was Chief Justice anyway, and nobody can change that. So that's the first time we heard that. That's the Tuffour story. It's all done, but just to bring you the history, I'm building it up to today, and then we understand where these things are coming from. So that was Tuffour and the Attorney General. Just as a matter of interest, for those of you who like the constitutional history, who were the lawyers in this matter? Okay, there we go. So for the plaintiffs, that is Dr. Tuffour. These were the three lawyers that represented Tuffour in 1979 who were urging upon the court that the court cannot, the court can interfere in whatever Parliament is doing so long as it's unconstitutional. They were making the point that Justice Akpaloo was already a Chief Justice and the vetting of Justice Akpaloo was unconstitutional. The team was led by Nana Akufo-Addo. It included Dr. Edmond Prempeh, who is today a chief in Mensah Palace, and guess what? Chachu Chikata. Time changes, isn't it? This is 1979. I'm sure a lot of you were not born. Okay, I was born, but I was small. So this is the set of lawyers who defended the Constitution and said that the Supreme Court, for the first time, they said the Supreme Court can interfere with Parliament. That the fact that Parliament is a master of its own procedure does not mean that Parliament can breach constitutional matters. It will be interesting to hear what Chachu Chikata says about the ruling of yesterday. Thankfully, all of them are happily with us. Dr. Prempeh is now a chief in Mensah Palace. Nana Akufo-Addo has already spoken about the ruling. Chachu Chikata hasn't. It will be very, very interesting to see what Chachu Chikata says about the ruling, because he it was who went to Supreme Court in 1979 to make the point that the Supreme Court can interfere with Parliament so long as Parliament is doing something unconstitutional. Chachuchi Kata said that in 1979 to the Supreme Court. Nana Akufo-Addo said that to the Supreme Court. Today, Nana Akufo-Addo has affirmed that position. We can't ask Dr. Prempeh because he's a chief, okay, unless you go to Mensah Palace to ask him. But Chachuchi Kata is around. The journalists should ask him. That's what I talk about all the time. They should ask him that, Mr. Chikata, you made these arguments before the Supreme Court in 1979. Your arguments have been upheld by the Supreme Court yesterday. Justice Jones Doche has upheld your argument, Mr. Chikata. Do you still stand by it or have you changed your mind? That would be an interesting question for journalists to ask him. But hold on, let's build the story. Okay, so congratulations to the three of them. They opened the eyes of the judiciary and the eyes of the law reports to say that, well, the courts can always interfere. Let's move on. Okay. So these were the lawyers for the defendant, that is Attorney General Joe Randolph and Mr. Archibald Late Jabate. The two of them represented the state and they were the losing party in the matter. So that's Tuffour and Attorney General. Next came, we had to wait until 1997 for this matter of whether Parliament is a master of its own procedure to be tested again. In 1997, it was a bit more elaborate, and I'll go into it. What was the 1997 matter about? It was about vetting again. Can you imagine? 79 was about vetting. 97 was about vetting as well. It was about vetting. What was the matter? The matter was that the majority NDC in Parliament at the time had been the main party in Parliament in 1992 because the opposition boycotted the Parliament. And then in 1996, the opposition took up the seats in Parliament. They didn't win many. 61 seats were won by the New Patriotic Party. 5 seats were won by the Convention People's Party. And I believe 2 other independent candidates, including the legendary Hawa Yakubu Ogede, may she rest in peace. So 1997, January 1997, the opposition was in Parliament. And then, because NDC had been in Parliament alone in 1992, the vetting was uneventful. Nobody even remembers it. But the Constitution had required the vetting, of course. We remember it because Ekos Pilgabra was disqualified because he was not a registered voter. That's the only thing we remember from the 1992 vetting. Everybody went through. Speculations were arriving in the media that how is vetting going to be now that the opposition NDC MPP was in Parliament? And there was a lot of difficulty and rancor among the opposition and the government at the time. Rawlings was in full flight and JH Mensah and others were there. So everyone was anticipating what will happen. Okay. In the circumstance, a letter was sent to the Speaker of Parliament announcing the list of ministers. It was decided by the NDC at the time because they wanted to avoid the MPP people in the vetting committee. It was decided that, look, people who were already ministers in the first term of Rawlings do not need to go through any vetting. It is those who were not ministers who are coming for the first time that needed to go through vetting because they were trying to avoid the MPP doing the vetting thing. JH Mensah, who was minority leader, quickly took out a writ at the Supreme Court, reminding himself of Tuffour and Attorney General, went to the Supreme Court to say, look, Parliament is going to violate the Constitution. I want the Supreme Court to speak about it. Let's hear the story about that one. So this is the case. JH Mensah versus the Attorney General. Let's see what the letters. Now, I want the letters after that. I want the letters, please. Okay, they'll get me the letters quickly and then we'll deal with it. Yeah. Okay, so so this is the first letter that was written by JH Mensah to the Speaker. JH Mensah is minority leader. He wrote to the Speaker. Okay, I hope they have the letter in detail. Is that all we have? Yes, okay, so this is the letter to the Speaker and it's signed by JH Mensah. These are the details. Okay, with reference to the President's letter to you on the 10th of February 1997, reference XYZ, and the various consultations that have taken place on the issue of the appointment of ministers, I will be very grateful if you would confirm that in submitting the names listed in the first paragraph of his letter as members of his new cabinet, the President was inviting Parliament to exercise its power of prior approval of their appointment as ministers. Now, this JH Mensah writing to the Speaker, telling him that the letter that President Rawlings wrote to you with the ministers, was he inviting Parliament to exercise our right of prior approval guaranteed under the Constitution, Article 78, that ministers shall be appointed with the prior approval of Parliament? JH Mensah is asking that question of the Speaker. Okay, let's move on. The letter continues. JH Mensah says, I am seeking this confirmation in order to be assured that no action in Parliament is taken which in any way prejudices the determination of the constitutional issues raised in my writ, of which you have notice, I will be grateful for an urgent response to this letter. Yours sincerely, JH Mensah, Minority Leader. That's how sophisticated Ghana's parliament used to be. They write letters, they don't fight, they write. You see the quality of the letter. So JH Mensah says that he's seeking the confirmation from the speaker because he wants to be sure that no action is taken in parliament to prejudice the matter that he has raised before the Supreme Court, because he had by that time filed the writ to the Supreme Court. The speaker had notice of the writ for the Supreme Court to say whether or not parliament's prior approval is excluded from ministers who are so-called holdover ministers who were in the first administration of Rawlings. That's the concern here. Okay, let's see what happens. JH Mensah wrote that to the speaker, Justice D.F. Annan. Justice D.F. Annan then acknowledges JH Mensah's letter. On the same day, he responds to JH Mensah as follows. What does Justice Annan say? He says as follows. The letter is Honorable JH Mensah to Honorable Dear. It says, Dear Sir, this is Justice Annan writing, appointment of ministers, Article 78(1) of the Constitution. He says, I acknowledge the receipt of your letter, reference so and so, dated 13 February 1997, on the appointment of ministers, Article 78(1) of the Constitution. He says, my reading of the express words of the letter from the President's office leads me to the view that all the names of the persons proposed, whether they are retained ministers or newly nominated ministers, were submitted to the House for the purpose of the discharge of the House's constitutional responsibilities in relation to the approval of ministers. Full stop. He goes on. Processes and procedures leading to the approval or rejection of ministers remain entirely within the competence and authority of the House. I agree that no action may be taken in Parliament which, in terms of our standing orders, prejudices the determination of the constitutional issues raised in your writ, which is now pending before the Supreme Court. Fantastic. That's how it ought to be. And that's how it used to be. That's how it has to be again. That's how it's going to be. This is Parliament. The Speaker is writing to the Minority Leader. He says that, well, the letter that the President wrote to me, I believe that he's writing to Parliament for us to discharge our responsibility. However, how we discharge that responsibility, I think, is entirely within the context of Parliament. You remember the phrase, Parliament's a master of his own procedure. Speaker agrees that, I agree, however, that we should not do anything in Parliament that will prejudice the constitutional issues raised in your writ. Okay, so what did the Speaker do? The Speaker proceeded painfully to stop the Finance Minister, Richard Kwame Pepra, from reading the budget because the writ that JH Mensah filed was still pending before the Supreme Court. The writ was to determine whether Richard Kwame Pepra, who was the holdover finance minister, can continue to hold himself out as finance minister even without the vetting and the prior approval of Parliament. Therefore, Justice Annan decided that the budget cannot be read. Kwame Pepra cannot appear before the House and read it because he didn't want to do anything that will prejudice the constitutional issues raised in JH Mensah's writ before the Supreme Court. That's interesting. Let's see how the story ends up. Okay, now I want the opinion of the Supreme Court. I like the opinion. Put the opinion of Justice Akwa and Akins up there, and then we'll deal with it as we build up slowly to what happened yesterday. Okay, I believe now I have it. So what was the matter before the court? The court was asked that, can Parliament decide that we will not vet ministers because they were part of the first government of Rawlings, and Rawlings has won elections again? The court was clear. They said, in terms of prior approval, Parliament must decide what prior approval is. That when the Constitution has given Parliament a job to do, Parliament must decide how they do it. And so prior approval is not a term of art. It doesn't mean vetting. Now it means vetting because it's the standing orders. But at that time, they said it doesn't mean vetting. Parliament can decide that as many as are in favor, the minister comes and they say, we will do a voice vote to approve ministers. So you have Kojo Oponkroma is there, Minister for Information. And then they say, as many as are in favor, say, the ayes have it, Oponkroma is approved. He doesn't have to go through an interview or vetting like we do today. The Supreme Court said Parliament can do that. That's okay. So they said, those ministers must go through prior approval. Parliament must decide what prior approval means. But then let's move on. This is Justice Akwa writing at the conclusion of the ruling. Very interesting. He says, and I hope that everybody's listening. And when I say everybody, they know themselves. Everybody, listen. Okay. where the Constitution allocates power or function to any authority, like Parliament, and that authority exercises that power or function within the parameters of that provision and the Constitution as a whole, a court has no jurisdiction to interfere with the exercise of that function. Then I entirely agree that the doctrine applies in our constitutional jurisprudence. Okay, hold it. Aqua says, where the Constitution has given an authority, he says, like Parliament, to exercise a certain power, that power is exercised within the parameters of the Constitution. If they are doing that, if they are exercising the power within the parameters of the Constitution, no court can say anything. So Constitution says prior approval of Parliament. Parliament says, yes, we'll do prior approval. Send us a list. The list comes. Okay, prior approval means we all jump. Those who like upon chroma, jump. Or those who like upon chroma, bow down your head. Aqua says, that's okay. The Constitution has given the authority, Parliament, the power of prior approval of the President's ministers. They should decide how they want to do it. Whether they want to do it by vetting, whether they want to do it by whatever, their standing orders should decide. He goes on. He says, for this is what is implied in the concept of separation of powers. Great. He says that's what separation of powers is about. Let's move on. He says, but, and that's a very big but, and that but relates to what is happening today. But if by the doctrine it is meant that even where the authority exercises that power in violation of that constitutional provision, a court has no jurisdiction to interfere because it is the Constitution which allocated that power to that authority, then I emphatically disagree. Okay, we're getting somewhere, isn't it? Justice Aqua says that where an authority has been given something, they can do it. But if that should mean that even when they are violating the provisions of the Constitution in doing so, then he doesn't see how the Supreme Court cannot interfere. Parliament has been given the power to pass bills. They've been given the power to vote, and they've been given the power to do voice votes and counts and all of that. The Constitution has provided what a quorum means and what voting means. Justice Aqua, may he rest in peace, says that if that means that they can violate the Constitution, then he disagrees. That Parliament cannot violate the Constitution. That authority cannot violate the Constitution. Let's move on. There's another text in the same case by Justice Akins. He says, the courts cannot justifiably avoid its constitutional responsibility, and it will be palpably wrong to suggest that the courts will be usurping the constitutional function of Parliament if the court exercises its original exclusive jurisdiction to interpret and enforce the Constitution, as the Attorney General seems to contend. The fact that such matter involves a political question does not necessarily mean that it cannot be adjudicated upon. I like this one. This is more direct. This is Justice Akins speaking. Let's take it again and consider all the matters. The court here refers to Supreme Court. Akins says, the Supreme Court cannot justifiably avoid its constitutional responsibility, and it will be palpably wrong to suggest that the Supreme Court will be usurping the constitutional function of Parliament. Now that's what President Mahama is saying tonight. President Mahama seems to be saying that the Supreme Court is usurping Parliament. Justice Akins says no, they are not. He says it will be palpably wrong to suggest that the court will be usurping the constitutional functions of Parliament if the court exercises its original exclusive jurisdiction to interpret and enforce the Constitution, as the Attorney General seems to contend. The Attorney General then was Obeda Samoa. The fact that such a matter involves a political question, that's very interesting. And Akins said this in 1997. It's happened today. The matter of whether the Deputy Speaker can vote or not is a political question because it has to do with whether the MPP can pass the e-levy or not. Huge political question. Momentous political question. Justice Akins said that in 1997, that the fact that it involves a political question does not necessarily mean that it cannot be adjudicated upon. That's what he said. That's why sometimes they are asked to read. They have been told, you should read. Stop the shouting and rabble. Read. It's there. Akins said it in 1997. Tom, you haven't heard it. You are talking. He says that the fact that it involves a political question does not mean that it cannot be adjudicated upon. It's on page 22, page 232 of the Supreme Court of Ghana Law Reports 1997. It's right there. Justice Aiken said it. Justice Aqua has said something similar in the case of JH Mensah and the Attorney General, which involves a question of whether the Supreme Court can interfere with matters happening in Parliament. That has been decided upon in 1997. Anyway, let's get back to the story, and we're going to build it up to today. We're not done yet. We're going to build up to today. We'll roll it out and then send your text message. We believe that by the time we finish, we will have led you to a certain conclusion that we will announce. Okay, so that's so this is the lawyers for JH Mensah and Attorney General. We did 1979. We're back at 1997. See who is still there doing constitutional matters, and see why he cannot resist talking about constitutional matters. Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo was there again. He was lawyer for JH Mensah. He was there. And with him, Tony Akoto-Ampao, his good friend, and now his lawyer, who is also lawyer for Vomaho, by the way. Akoto is lawyer for Vomaho. So Nana Akufo-Addo with him, Tony Akoto-Ampao, were the lawyers in the famous case of JH Mensah and Attorney General in 1997. And who were the lawyers on the other side? Hey, there you go. History is sweet, you know. History is sweet. The lawyers on the other side of the case, the losing lawyers, I should say, the lawyers who felt that the Supreme Court cannot interfere with Parliament and who lost the case. So Nana Akufo-Addo was on the winning side of the case. So remember, in this matter of whether Supreme Court can interfere with Parliament, Tuffour and Attorney General has said it. JH Mensah has said both was urged by Nana Akufo-Addo on the Supreme Court, one in 1979, one in 1997. One he was with Chachuchi Kata, the other one he was with Akoto-Ampao. And then the losing lawyers is Dr. Obed Asamoah, the Attorney General for the state, and him. Badamushi Benz Kaiser, how is he doing these days? Martin Hamidu, how is he doing? Martin Hamidu was the other lawyer in the matter. History is always very, very, very important. Okay, so now the judges for Tuffour and Attorney General, Justice E.M.P. Soa was the leading judge in 1979. This is Justice Apalu, about whom the matter was discussed in 1979. Okay, so now let's come to today. Let's come to the details of the matter that we want to talk about. I was looking for KB Ayensu's letter. Can you get me Ayensu's letter? It's a book that I need to talk about just before I come to the 1992 Constitution. So this is the book that I want to talk to you about. During the research, I picked it up. I've shared with some journalists, and I've told them that it's a book that every parliamentary reporter should read. Now, it's written by KB Ayensu and S.N. Dakwa. It was sponsored by JH Mensah and the Institute of Economic Affairs. This is a very important book. The Evolution of Parliament in Ghana is by KB Ayensu and S.N. Dakwa. Now, KB Ayensu had been a clerk of parliament from the days of Kwame Nkrumah up to the second parliament of the Fourth Republic. And he wrote this book with S.N. Dakwa, who had been a clerk from the Buzia time up to 1997. And they wrote this book. Now, let's get me the Ayensu's conclusion about the relationship between parliament and the Supreme Court. Okay. So in this book, Ayensu talks about the supremacy of the Constitution and consensus. That's the title. He goes on. The approach taken by the Supreme Court and the House itself to resolve the impasse underline the fact that the Constitution is the supreme law of the country. Indeed, the Constitution framers of 1969, 79, and 92 each prescribed a parliament with limited legislative powers. That's interesting. A parliament with limited legislative powers. Let's go on. It continues. Article 93.2, which we shall be referring to, of the 1992 Constitution, makes it clear that although Parliament is vested with legislative powers, such powers must be exercised subject to the provisions of the Constitution. But that's very obvious. And I agree with the President that there's no controversy about this matter. It's very straightforward. Why people think it's not straightforward because of whatever reason, I don't understand. This is KB Ayensu writing. May he rest in peace. Both he and S.N. Dakwa. What is KB Ayensu writing? The man is an Nkrumahist. He's been a clerk of parliament. He's not MPP. He's not NDC. He's just writing about parliament. His whole life he spent in parliament. He became a clerk of parliament in his 30s. By the time he was in his 80s, he had still been a clerk of parliament. So that is a fountain of knowledge that we can draw from, can't we? He's not partisan. This is what he says. Article 93.2 of the 1992 Constitution makes it clear that although Parliament is vested with legislative powers, such powers must be exercised subject to the provisions of the 1992 Constitution. For example, short of an amending the Constitution, there is no procedure available to Parliament by which it can pass a law making Ghana a one-party state. Any law passed by Parliament which is inconsistent with any provision of the Constitution can be challenged in the Supreme Court, which may declare such a law null and void. Well, how complicated is this? I don't know. We don't even have to come as far as Ayentu to find. That's not complicated. It's in the Constitution. Okay, so let's move now to the constitutional articles. Ayentu goes on. It's often said that Parliament is a master of its own procedure. And I like this one. Ayentu says, it's often said that Parliament is a master of its own procedure. Article 110 of the Constitution does allow Parliament to regulate its own proceedings. But procedures adopted by Parliament must not contravene any of the provisions of the Constitution. These measures were adopted by the constitutional framers against the backdrop of the nation's past experience. Fantastic. So now you're understanding it. If they had read this, they wouldn't be making the noises they are making. And then they say that don't learn history. Take history from the Caribbean, because they know these things are in the history. They know that it's there. We will remind you all the time of what is in the history. That's our job. It's a righteous job, because truth will always triumph over lies and evil. Ayentu is speaking. He says it here. He's giving us the reason why Parliament should not be allowed, because a master of his own procedure, to do anything. He's telling us it is because of our past. Why because of our past? In the Nkrumah Parliament, Parliament was doing a lot of things. And a lot of things Parliament did was unconstitutional. And when they went to the court, they said that Parliament is a master of its own procedure. So since then, we have decided that in all our constitutions, we will give Parliament a limit to its legislative authority, that limit being the provisions of the Constitution, and the Supreme Court to be the only forum that can check the limits of Parliament's expressions. Okay, so that's what Ayentu says here. He says that the procedures adopted by the Parliament must not contravene any of the provisions of the Constitution. These measures, he says, were adopted by the constitutional framers against the backdrop of the nation's past experience. Okay, let's get to today's matter, and then let's try and wrap up quickly. Now, so we go to Article 1 of the Constitution, the one that we used to do our work. 1-2, we used to do our flyer. Okay, Article 1-2 of the Constitution says, this Constitution shall be the supreme law of Ghana, and any other law found to be inconsistent with any provision of this Constitution shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. Parliament's standing orders, one of them which today has been struck down by the Supreme Court as being in contravention of the Constitution, is void. This is what the Constitution says. The Constitution that we voted for in 1990, this is what it says. It says this Constitution shall be the supreme law of Ghana, and any other law found to be inconsistent with any provisions of this Constitution shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. I want journalists to do something tonight. Talk to Chachuchi Kata. Talk to Marietta Brew, who was Attorney General for President Mahama. Talk to Tony Letha, who was John Mahama's lawyer. Speak to Betty Mould, who was Attorney General for Professor Mills. Let's hear their view on this. We don't want to hear Johnson Asiedu Nketia. He doesn't understand anything. Talk to the people who understand, and let's have a useful debate. Talk to Chachuchi Kata. Present him with his arguments before the Supreme Court in 1979. Present it to him. Talk to Marietta Brew. He was Attorney General for John Mahama, Tony Letha, the lawyers. Don't talk to Asiedu Nketia. We don't want to hear. He doesn't understand any of these things. So this is what the law says. This Constitution shall be the supreme law of Ghana, and any other law found to be inconsistent with any provision of this Constitution shall, to the extent of the inconsistencies, be void. Now, how are we going to know that a law is inconsistent? How do we make the determination that some law is inconsistent, and who decides that it should be void? Let's move on. It comes here. Okay, they'll take me. All right, they'll put it up soon. I'm looking for 93, I believe. Let's move on. They'll do it. They'll do it very soon. They're going to get me Article 93 too. I'm sure that has it come? Yes, I saw it. The Supreme Court shall. Okay, so let's move on. It's okay. Let's take it from here. So this is 93.2. Subject, that's what Ayentu was quoting, by the way. Subject to the provisions of this Constitution, the legislative power of Ghana shall be vested in Parliament and shall be exercised in accordance with this Constitution. Is that complicated? The law that vests the power of legislation in Parliament itself, in 93.2, brings you the limitation It says the legislative power shall be vested in Parliament and it shall be exercised in accordance with this constitution, so that if the legislative powers of Parliament is being exercised outside the constitution, the Supreme Court can say something. Let's go to the provision that gives the Supreme Court the power to say it. Sorry, my touch screen is messing up though. Let's go to the next article, which is the other one, the next one. Okay, so that is the Supreme Court shall, for the purpose of a declaration under clause 1 of this article, make such orders and give such directions as it may consider appropriate for giving effect or enabling effect to be given to the declaration so made. Now, this is Article 2 from the Article 1, which says that the Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land, and any law, like Parliament standing orders, found to be inconsistent with it shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. It says here, continuing from that the Supreme Court shall, compulsory, shall, for the purposes of a declaration under clause 1, which is a declaration that the standing orders of Parliament is null and void because it violates the Constitution, shall give orders and directions as it may consider appropriate to give effect to the ruling that they have given. So yesterday, the Supreme Court gave the ruling that this part of Parliament standing orders that says that the Deputy Speaker cannot vote is null and void, and they ordered that it be struck down from the standing orders of Parliament. That's the power given to them by the Constitution. How difficult is it for anybody to contemplate this? But Asiedu Nketia will not understand it. This is very simple. He doesn't understand it. Anyway, let's move on to now Article 102. Now, these are the controversial matters. I'm getting to the end now. Article 102. So, Article 102 and 104, they say two things. 102 is where there's a constitutional prescription on the quorum for Parliament. 104 is the constitutional prescription on voting in Parliament. So let's start with 102. 102 says, a quorum of Parliament, apart from the person presiding, shall be 1/3 of all the members of Parliament. That's quorum. A quorum of Parliament does not count the one presiding. It doesn't. That's what the Constitution says. That's the law for now. Until it changes, I may disagree with it, you may disagree with it, but that is the position of the law today. And that's why I heard one of the moderate voices in the NDC said that, well, we will have to agree with it. If you don't want it, we have to go to court and change it. We have to file for a review and see whether we can convince the Supreme Court. That's the only way to go. For those who don't have the rabble-rousing mentality, that's the only way to go. The Supreme Court has ruled. But the Supreme Court, have they always ruled for one party or the other? Justice Jones-Doche sat on the election petition panel and he ruled that President Mahama was validly elected. Have they forgotten that? Why are they like that? Justice Doche, whom they are screaming at today, he sat on the election petition panel and he ruled that John Dramani Mahama was validly elected. So what's the point? When Supreme Court rules for you, you are happy. Just weeks ago, Justice Doche again ruled that until the Attorney General serves the Asin North MP, they should not bring any application to court. And they were dancing and jubilating in Parliament. The same Justice Doche rules today that the first Deputy Speaker can vote, even when he's presiding. And you say, KKKKKKK. I mean, why do they do these things? We have to build a democracy. And the democracy does not have to be built on partisan NDC, MPP, Akufo-Addo, Kufuor, John Mahama. It's built on the provisions of the 1992 Constitution. Fundamental law of the land. That's how we build it. So you don't appropriate and reprobate. And when Justice Doche rules that President Mahama was validly elected, that day they were wearing white. Haven't you seen it in our video? Pakwesi Misata, President Mahama, Asiedu, they were wearing white. They were dancing. Justice Doche said President Mahama was validly elected. Today, Justice Doche says that the first Deputy Speaker can vote. And you say what? Oh, please. Okay. So that's quorum of Parliament. 104 is voting in Parliament. Let's get to that one. Okay. It says, except otherwise provided in this Constitution. Now, it is otherwise provided in the standing orders. That's not what the Constitution doesn't know standing orders. So it says, except otherwise provided in this Constitution, matters in Parliament shall be determined by the votes of the majority of members present and voting with at least 1/2 of all the members of Parliament present. Where in this provision does it say, contemplate, even speculate that its first Deputy Speaker, presiding as the Speaker, cannot vote? That's the matter that went before the Supreme Court. And the lawyer that filed the matter before the Supreme Court, we hear, has NDC sympathies, which is fine, which is okay. There should be NDC, there should be MPP. That's how we build a democracy. So he went to court and he said he's seeking a declaration that Article 104 of the Constitution means that the second deputy speaker cannot vote. The court said no. Article 104 means that the second deputy speaker and the first deputy speaker can actually vote. That's what the 7 panel members said, including Justice Adom-Otchere, who said President Mahama was validly elected. Including him, he presided. That's what they said. They said, except as otherwise provided in this Constitution, matters in Parliament shall be determined by the votes of the majority of members present and voting, with at least half of all the members present. Members present and voting. Is the Deputy Speaker a member of Parliament? I mean, that's what Moses was saying. I'll play Moses for you again. Let's look at the philosophical matter. So I go and contest elections with Sam George in Ningo Pram Pram. My name is Paul Adom-Otchere. I represent WDP. Sam George represents the NDC. We vote. We go to Lockhorn's election. We fight. We blast each other. Bah, 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 bah. On voting day, Sam George wins the election by 13,120. I come second by 13,099. Sam George is elected as the member of Parliament for Ningo Pram Pram. Sam George comes to Parliament. And then on the first day of Parliament, the leader calls him and says, Sam George, we want to sort of promote you because you're a young MP, you're doing well. We want you to be the first deputy speaker. Is that okay? He says, let me talk to my constituency chairman. He calls constituency chairman. Okay, the people want me to be first deputy speaker. Constituency chairman said, what does it mean? He said, I will just be presiding when the speaker is not there. Constituency chairman said, does it mean that you lose your vote? He said, no, I won't lose my vote. Oh, how can I lose my vote? We have it. We won't lose it. He said, don't go and lose your vote. He said, no, I won't lose it. Okay, you can do it. So he becomes second deputy speaker of Parliament. The people of Pram Pram voted for him. He sits as second deputy speaker of Parliament. A matter comes up about sea defense. Pram Pram has sea. A matter comes up about sea defense. The Parliament has voted that there should be no sea defense in Pram Pram. If Sam George were to cast his vote, there will be sea defense in Pram Pram. If he were not to cast his vote, there will be no sea defense in Pram Pram. Have you thought about a situation like that? And then he sits there and says he's second deputy speaker, so he cannot cast his vote. And then there's no sea defense in Pram Pram. I mean, I don't understand how any constitutional person looking at this matter will believe that the second deputy speaker should not have a vote. Only Asiedu Nketia will think like that and urge people to go and beat up a second deputy speaker. Only Asiedu Nketia. That's why we need to banish people like Asiedu Nketia from our politics. Only them will think like this. Look at the scenario I've painted to you. Sam George, he's MP for Ningo Pram Pram. They need sea defense. Parliament cast a vote that shows that -1 vote, sea defense will not happen in Pram Pram. He's sitting there as second deputy speaker. He shouldn't vote. He should say, and go to Pram Pram and tell the people that, oh, I'm sorry, because I was presiding as second deputy speaker, and my people say that we don't have a vote, so because of that, we couldn't do the sea defense, so I beg. They will kill him. Now let me make it more graphic. The Constitution says, when you elect a Speaker of Parliament on the day of election, and that Speaker of Parliament is a member of Parliament, immediately he's elected, he loses his seat. He cannot continue to be a member of Parliament. And thankfully, by the grace of God, we have had that scenario. The Honorable Adom-Otchere, Right Honorable Adom-Otchere, was member of Parliament for Adom-Otchere for the NDC. In 2013, January 7, 2013, Adom-Otchere's name was presented as a Speaker of Parliament. He was elected by the Parliament as Speaker. From the minute he was elected, a by-election was declared the next morning by the Electoral Commission in Adom-Otchere because they have lost their MP. So they need another MP. Guess what? The Constitution doesn't say the same for Deputy Speaker. A Deputy Speaker is elected a member of Parliament. It's okay. Do you think that the framers of the Constitution were asleep when they put that in there? That when you are elected Speaker, you lose your seat and you go and another person comes in to represent the people because the Constitution says the Speaker, qua Speaker, cannot represent any constituency because he is the leading umpire of the Parliament. The Deputy Speaker, however, retains his seat. What does it mean? He retains his seat means he retains the representation of the people. It also means that he retains his vote. And then when he's going to vote, they go and they are beating him up and fighting blows that will not let you vote because he's going to pass E-levy. Is that how to build a constitution? Did you see the letters JH Mensah and DFNA were exchanging? Why are we losing the quality? Why are we losing it? Why are we getting to rabble-rousing? Because people like Asiedu Nketia are leading political parties. So you're going to have that. That's what they know. Rabble-rousing, revolution, beat up. That's all they know. They don't understand constitutional processes. They don't understand it. Every day they are just joking and let's fight. And urging people to go and fight. That's all they know. That's not how you build a constitution. You have to understand and go into the mind of the framers of the constitution.